Hello, everybody. This is Coresair Mack, President of the Illinois Mental Health Counselors Association, and today I'm joined by our very own special guest, Kris Wheatley. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Coresair. And you?
Oh, I am doing great too. I'm up, surprisingly, for a Saturday, right? But I'm here. I
Yeah.
ate breakfast. I even got a run in. So far, very productive day. Very productive.
Wonderful.
Mhm. Alrighty. So, first things first, all your fans want to know, how did you become interested in counseling?
I was a young child, and in my young childhood, I was a leader. And I can say that because at age 6, I was asked to help children read in my classroom, and I had to do it every day. And so I was really exposed to that at a very early age. But since that time, when I was about 13 or 14, I was a real observant child and an adolescent, and I observed that we had nothing going on in our neighborhood, but we had a lot of kids all over the neighborhood. I lived in a predominantly lower middle class neighborhood 52 years ago, and I thought that they needed some type of an activity for the summer. So I developed a summer camp, and that summer camp it was called Fun Time Camp. It had all kinds of activities. It had social emotional things. I didn't have a word for social emotional at the time, but it had learning activities, social emotional, cooperative type of things. And that was my start of leadership. I also did a lot of volunteering in my teen years at Red Cross. Not asked to do that, I just did it. Did a lot of telethon work for multiple sclerosis and dystrophy, the Variety Club. That was 51 years ago. Then I became a second and third grade teacher. And at that time, there was no social emotional component. But kids would like to talk to you about things that were non academic. So I developed at the beginning of every day a thing that was called I Am Special. And to this day, my students are somewhere between the ages of 38 and 51. Some of them still have the book, I Am Special, because we're in contact on Facebook. But that was something that was not done. It was non academic, but it looked like it was a need. I felt that was leadership. I also started team leaders at the grade school level because I wondered why we didn't have, I think it was called grade level chairpersons. And I brought it to the attention of my boss when I was about 24. And she said, well, why don't you do that? And I said, well, I'm not the boss. I'm just an employee here, but I just think it would be nice to have people working together with one person leading. That was more of my leadership. Well, that finally evolved into my first group counseling course, and that was in 1989. And that was with Dr. Al Millerin. I formally began my master's in counseling in 1991. And that is where I'm going to stop with my first question. Did I answer your first question?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Definitely did. All right. So then the second question, since you mentioned, you started this program and then 1991, all that stuff. So that perfectly segues into the next one with, how long have you been a counselor?
So I've been a counselor since 1995. I finished my degree in 1994. And because the school district was so kind to pay for all the coursework, which they did, I owed them another year in my teaching career before I embarked on my first job. And I have to tell you that in large ways, that was probably my best year of teaching because I had counseling skills from the training I had at Governor State that I didn't have prior to 1991 all the way through 1994. So that actually was a blessing.
All right. Nice. Very nice. So then, again, that perfectly segues into the next question. I swear we did not plan this, folks. All right. But what school did you go to for your undergraduate and your graduate degrees?
I went to Joliet Junior College. I started out at, I thought I was going to be a piano major. I am a pianist and I taught piano for 20 years, but I thought that's really where I was headed. but always I wanted to do some component where I had a counseling component, but I wasn't directed to that direction yet. So at Joliet Junior College, it was where all of my gen ed classes, all of my piano classes. Then I went to Northern Illinois University. I'm sure you're familiar with that. And that's where I did my undergrad in elementary education. And following that, I also took some coursework in 96, I believe it was, University of Illinois. I took some postgraduate courses on women with disabilities, and they were just opening up their doctoral programs for disabilities and policy studies. And I think it was their first year. So I was debating at that time whether or not I wanted to get my doctoral degree. And if I was, it was going to be in one of those two things, policy or disabilities, or was I going to get my LCPC? And after discussing the avenues of what it would look like if I got my doctorate, if I got my LCPC, which avenue looked the best for me, the best avenue for me at that time, and is still at this time, my LCPC. The work I did there, I absolutely adored. I used it in my work as a counselor to this day. I hope I answered your question.
Oh yeah, yeah, you definitely did. You definitely did. So a lot of people don't know, but you also sent me your resume. So you sent me stuff going all the way back from 1991 all the way up here to 2023. So you definitely have a wealth of knowledge and information that hopefully you're ready to share, because this next one's gonna semi tap into that. Right. So,
Okay.
you know, you did your thing, you graduated, and now you're out there working in different jobs. So
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Right. So then what places did you work starting off in your profession, and what did you learn as a result from working at those places?
Okay. So I worked in middle schools for 15 years, elementary schools for 1 year. I worked in North Suburban Cook, very close to where I think you may have been as well, in Niles, I believe.
Mhm.
And so I worked there. I worked in Will County. I worked in DuPage, and I worked in Kane County. I ended up in Kane County for my last 13 years of school counseling. I was a school counselor for 16 years. What I learned in all of those places, none of them were the same in picture. If we looked at them, they were all different in ethnic groups, in money, in levels of resources, but they were the same in all of the things that I learned. Is that what you'd like to know about now?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay, this is what I learned. I learned the necessity and the art of building trusting relationships, maintaining support systems for yourself and others, staying current with research and trends, and always looking to develop programs and systems to meet the needs of the students. And so what I did in order to facilitate those needs is and that's why I said the policy thing, it always came back. And so did the disability thing in my classes that I took at University of Illinois. I would take that information and I would link it to what the current policies were in the system, what the existing or non-existing programs were, whether or not they needed to be refined, adjusted to meet the needs of the students, well before we had the words implicit bias. And also what would be the best way to address the counseling services in each environment, because again, they were all different, but they were all the same in my view as to what the students needed, what the teachers needed, what the administrators needed for support from you. And they all needed an understanding of what your role was and how your role was going to benefit everybody in the system. I also learned to reflect, relax, stay grounded. And it's difficult to stay grounded in any job that you're in, any situation you're in, unless you program yourself to say, ground yourself. balance my activities. Piano is my activity, decorating is my activity, travel is my activities. I try each day, whether I was in the school counseling job or not, to focus positive energies in no matter what the situation was. But specifically when I was a school counselor, on the counseling services, positive, regular consultations with teachers. I used to go to work early, much earlier than sometimes the administrators, because I knew teachers were there. And I wanted to see the barometer of the school. What was the climate of the school? Specifically, what was the climate of the teachers? What were they coming in with? What was their personal agenda that they were walking in with that may or may not have had an effect on the student or the other employees. So I made sure I came in early every day and walked around. I did experience I learned this way after, that implicit bias issues were throughout all systems. And I can tell you that from that resulted in, I'm going to come back to policies again, policy changes that I was instrumental in making at college, university levels, and at the middle school level, especially at my last school district. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. If it's okay to do that at this time, is it okay to do that?
Oh yeah, definitely go for it.
Okay. In my last position as a school counselor, 13 years in Kane County, my first year I was there, which would have been 1998, I believe, there were programs that were in place, and one of them was called 5th to 6th grade orientation. And I was in charge of doing this 5th to 6th grade orientation. I was a 6th grade counselor, and the 5th grade students were going to come over, and there were going to be a select group of students that were going to show them around and teach them about the school that I was in, and 1,000 students in the school. And so I was told that those students were selected out of the honors classes. I stopped and I said, why? And they said, well, this is how we've always done it. And I said, well, can I give you some information that may be helpful to just think about? And I said to my boss, is there a way that we can have representative students of all the students that will be coming in? All learning levels, all colors, all racial backgrounds. I think it's important that students see people like themselves when they're coming into a new school situation. And with hesitation, my boss said, we've never done that. I don't know that they can do that. And I said, well, I don't know what they'd be able to do until I would train and work with them. And I don't think there's any student in the school that could not be trained and worked with and would not be happy to be serving in this capacity. So that changed the policy of how we did orientations in the middle school. And again, again, I keep going back to policy, and I'm specifically going to go back in that situation to tell you that I had students across the board that were not just your average students. I had people participating that were behavior disorder classes. I had EMH students showing, I think that's the lowest learning level we had in our school. But I had the EMH students also showing around the other EMH students. I'm very proud of that policy change I did in the school. The other thing that I'm going to bring up, and I'm going to stop at this point and see if this is the most appropriate time to bring it up or not, is that I also brought in at the time, all the training was done when I was a school counselor. They would bring in outside people that seemed like they were totally unrelated to what the school system was and what the needs of the system were. They just picked people. And so I, again, thought that we were really not addressing the needs of the school specifically to all of the groups of students I had, as well as the teachers. So I would bring in community and state resources to educate on the missing components I saw. And what I brought in were DCFS people because nobody was formally trained on that. I also brought in speakers about peer mediation. I ended up running peer mediation programs. They didn't have them. I did it with no funding. I was a part of doing wellness programs and brought that material to the school and brought speakers to the school for that well before wellness was very well known.
Wow.
And I also identified, and I think this might even go back with what are the most important things you learned, but I do think it fits more with this, but identifying the key supports, the administrators, the teachers. I had school board members that were right with me with everything I did as a counselor, and especially when I was at the professional level of the state level. Community levels, I worked closely with a legislator who helped to change legislation for students. And what I tried to do is bring them in to see the professional capacities of what a counselor is involved in besides the day-to-day work as a school counselor. And they actually came to my, when I was president of the School Counseling Association, which I was, 2007 and 2008, they were there. My administrators were there. I had my board president there. My last part of what I learned is continue to read, continue to research, continue to mentor, and do things like this, leadership presentations.
Wow. You've done a lot, right? I mean, as I'm hearing you talk and explain all these things, it's like, I mean, true, it might have been back in the 90s, but you would assume that schools would already have all of that stuff in place. So actually hearing that the school that you worked at didn't have that in place, I was like, oh, wow. So thank the Lord that you were there, right, to help a lot of those students.
Can I back up a little bit to that question? Because I think there's another part about what I learned that's going to go even a little further back.
Yeah.
When we backed up and I told you when I graduated,
Mm-hmm.
and I told you that that was in 94, but I also said that I took some extra classes and with women with disabilities and policy studies. I'm going to need to back up to my last year as a school counselor. No, I'm
Okay.
sorry. I'm going to back up as my last year in a graduate program
Mm-hmm.
at my university. And this is where policy and disability is going to come into play. I could have talked about it earlier, but it's coming to me right now to bring it up right at this situation.
Yeah, go for it.
So before we go into any other questions, what I learned in the graduate program I was in is that they also had missing pieces. And those missing pieces had to do with people with disabilities. And I can say that because I was in one of my classes and I said, how are we going to be addressing students with disabilities? Because as a teacher, I work with them all the time. And the answer was this. This was somewhere between 91 and 93.
Mm-hmm.
It went something like this. You're not going to be working with students with disabilities. That will be up to the social worker. You will be working just with the main students in the classroom. And my answer back, part of my leadership skills was always to answer back and question. And I do that a lot. And I said, and that would surprise me very much when I finished being a school counselor, because as a teacher, every year I've worked with students with disabilities, parents with disabilities. I worked with teachers with disabilities and community members with disabilities. So how am I going to be a skilled counselor if I don't get a chance to work with students with disabilities? I was told that that was not in the program. When I got to my internship, and before I started my internship, I said, I think it's important, because I was still pushing this. I still think it's important that I get some work on working with people with disabilities, even though we don't have it in our program here. And I was told that I would get no credit for doing that. I said, well, that's fine. I'm not looking for credit. What I'm looking for is experience and a background so that I am prepared. And so what I did was I worked with the Epilepsy Foundation in Greater Chicago, and I did pro bono work with them during my internship period. It didn't count for my internship period. what it counted for was my knowledge of how to work with people with disabilities. What I also did before I graduated, and it was in the last year, is that I convened a meeting with all of the uh, people in the counseling, all the professors in the counseling program, and the department chair, I believe, of the special ed piece of Governor State University, as well as the student services center that was they were supposed to serve people with disabilities. And the reason I did this is because I went to a ACA conference in 1994 in Minneapolis, and that conference was all on disabilities. That was always my passion way back when. So when I came back, I brought this information and convened a meeting due to a particular circumstance that warranted this meeting with all of these people. What ended up happening at that meeting when I provided all the materials I got from the ACA conference on disabilities and protocols and what should be in place at colleges and other settings, what ended up happening were policies changed at Governor State, and they now had a section for a thing called hidden disabilities. Those things you can't see as a person in another person. And that would have been diabetes, that would have been mental health issues, that would be seizure disorders, that could be anything, osteoporosis, anything you couldn't see that was physically or emotionally a component of a person that would be qualified as a person with a disability. So those policies were brought to the attention of Governor State in 1994 before I graduated. I didn't really know that the policy change had taken place until I got a phone call in 1995. In 1995, I got a phone call from a girl going to school in a private college in Illinois. And it went something like this: "You don't know me, but my name is." And she told me her name. And she says, "And I got your name because I understand that you are an advocate for people with disabilities. And I'm trying to finish a college program, and they're telling me I can't finish because of my disability." And so began the journey with her. But what she told me was they told me I need to go to Governor State because Governor State has a good policy on work on people with disabilities like me. And I found that really interesting because that is how I knew. I pulled it up on the website because at that time I was on computers, and there were all of the things I had submitted, and I had no idea until that time. All the things I had submitted to Governor State were now in policy in the Student Services Center at the university. I'm sure since that time they've even remodeled them to look much more in depth and to address the needs of students now in today's society. But what I found wonderful is that the work that I did that I thought was so important for that point in time, I never knew it was going to come back to me in the way it did with a phone call. By the way, that student that was trying to finish her program ended up finishing her program 4 years, straight A's. I believe she's works at the college level now in the counseling department. She's been doing that for the past probably 20 plus years.
Wow, nice. See, you made a small ripple and turned into a large wave, and that wave ended up helping someone else.
It did.
Right, perfect. That's great. Right, glad to hear. Congratulations to that student also. Because of you, she was able to pursue her dream. So perfect.
Yes, she was.
Right.
I think you were asking me about how I became involved in ICA, or is that coming next?
Oh yeah, that's the next question, definitely.
Okay.
Right, because a lot of people don't know this, but besides doing a lot, you're a very busy person, right? You got working at schools, changing policies, helping people, potentially even saving lives.
Yeah.
And then also on your resume, you have a lot of work that you've done in the professional area as well, right? So first one then, how did you become involved in ICA?
This is how I became involved. 1995, it was January, I got a phone call. And I got a phone call from one of my former professors. Her name is Dr. Diane Dr. Diane Chose. She was ICA President 1994 and 1995. She was also a National Career Development President under ACA's umbrella. And she was the career component of Governor State's program. So this is how the phone call went. Hi, Kris, this is Diane. And how are you doing? And I'm thinking, why is my professor calling me? I thought I finished the program. That's the first thing that came to my mind. Why would she be calling me? And she says, I'm wondering if you would be, no, she said exactly, I am appointing you to the Human Rights Committee as the Human Rights Chair for the Illinois Counseling Association. Then she stopped. And I stopped. And I said, may I ask why you're appointing me to this position at the Human Rights Committee of the Illinois Counseling Association? And she said, Kris, I was on the interview committee when you were finishing your work in your master's program. I read everything in your internship packet, and I think you would be the person that would best suit the Human Rights Committee. That is my start in the Illinois Counseling Association, formally in a leadership position.
Wow, that's amazing. Human Rights Committee. I did not even know they had a Human Rights Committee. So I learned something new today.
They have it, and they've postponed it several times throughout my years as a leader in my positions in the governing council. I have brought it back a couple of different times to say this is really the time to have your Human Rights Committee, because it is the place where things are addressed that are now going on in today's society. And every once in a while, someone will say, yes, that's a good idea. Perhaps it will come to fruition someday. But that's how I started. And
I know you started, and then
and from that time, from
Mhm.
1995 to 2006, I attended Midwest region leadership trainings, because you physically could go to these places and meet with the leaders and get trained to be a leader. I did that every year from 1995 to 2006. Did you want to know at this time how I became involved? That's how I became involved. I think I'm just going to stop right there. That's how I became involved. I got a phone call. Somebody tapped me on the shoulder and they said, I think you'd be good for this place in ICA.
Mhm. I mean, usually that's how the story goes, right?
Yes, it
Someone
does.
either gives you a phone call or you help out with something like, hey, you should come over here and do this.
Right.
Yep, and as the running joke goes, you start off doing something, eventually become president, right?
That's right.
So then what led you to run for ICA president?
I would say all those leadership things that I was doing before, but also when I became a counselor and I started to get very involved with the Counseling Association in a lot of different parts of the association. I thought my best place to be was as president, and I threw my hat into the ring because I thought I had an inherent capacity to. I always shared leadership skills. I utilized them. I tried to develop leadership skills with other people, but I wasn't in the place to really do that at the top of that organization. And everything that I did throughout all of my experiences always had this leadership component to it, beginning formally in 1987. So I thought the best place for me to be was somewhere at the top to oversee and to look at and see what was missing, what we could do, and how we could best serve our members and the clients that they serve. And so that's what's led me to run for ICA president. And probably the other thing that led me to run is my first experience in 1995 at the first Midwest region meeting. This is less than a year after I graduated. There was a very wonderful person. His name was George McCoy, and he was Midwest region chair at the time. and he tapped me on the shoulder and he said, this is all wonderful. And we were talking and he said, you can do this. And I didn't know George McCoy was a counselor. Anyway, I didn't know George McCoy except the fact that he was a Midwest region chair. And when he said, you can do this, I remember thinking, this is exactly what I want to do, but I don't think I'm at that point yet. So I had to share that with you. That also led me to run for ICA president.
All right, very nice. And, being ICA president, I'm sure you were in charge and involved with a lot of stuff, right? Being IMHCA president, I'm in charge and involved with a lot of stuff. So I'm pretty sure that must have been a lot more for you. So then, speaking of those things, what accomplishments were you most proud of as ICA president?
Okay, as ICA president, I'm going to start with April 3rd of 2004. I was at the national conference in Kansas City, Missouri. That was my year as president. And we received national recognition for first place award for large branch for the best leadership development program. Why I feel that is such a great accomplishment. Leadership skills and trainings are what my passion were for all of the years. And I finally came into the one place, and I wanted to see it come into that one place, into the Counseling Association, because we had never had an award for best leadership development program. And some of the other accomplishments that occurred before that is when I started the governing council in 2003, when I took office, I felt that a year before that, I planned a collaborative leadership guide. And I worked very closely with a graduate student to put together all the components of what I thought leaders needed. And so in that guide were all the policies of ICA, leadership, team development skills, ACA's policies, and it was a pretty big book. It's in the archives at the ICA office. I was very proud of that. And at the end of the year, they turned in their book. And what did we do the next year? We refined it and we spit it out to the next governing council. I think we did that for 2 years. I was very proud that we did that. My conference was in Springfield, Illinois. Why I was proud of that. We had over 500 people in attendance. I was told that we weren't going to get more than 200 or 300, but we did. And the speakers I had were ACA President Dr. David Kaplan, ACA past President Dr. David Kaplan, ACA President Dr. Mark Pope, ACA Midwest Region Chair Dr. Judy Seaborn, a very famous clinical psychologist. Her name was Dr. Judith Tellerman, Carl Olson, who was a CEO and leadership expert. We had 5 entertainments, and we had money in our budget to have all of this entertainment at every different function. Our overall profit, $19,000. I think it was $24,000, but once everything was paid out, I think it was $19,000. That was the biggest profit since 1994. I was pretty proud of that. I don't know that you know this, but graduate students were just a handful in 2003. And so at governing council, I brought up when I was president-elect, and I'm proud that this happened when I was president, but we increased the influence of graduate students and the presence of graduate students at the conference in different capacities. And there were 44, and that was a big number because I only had a handful. I know we have more than 44 now, but it was that piece that now you see the graduate students that are involved in IMHCA, and I'm sure you see them in ICA. That started back in 2003. They were in positions such as, and they were never before, they were on the conference committees, they were regional governors, they were division presidents, chapter presidents, they were on conference subcommittees. The only thing that they let graduate students do at the time in before 2003 is they were moderators, or they were helping with registration. I would call that implicit bias, wouldn't you?
Right? Yeah.
Um, and so I'm very, very proud of that. I'm also proud of the fact that during my year as president, I was a keynote speaker at Governor State University. Not a big deal to be a keynote speaker, but the big deal was that I was speaking with my first professor that I had in the late 80s. His name was Dr. Al Millerin. So I was there to talk about the importance of ICA and the profession of counseling and being an active member in ICA. I didn't know he was going to be there, and I didn't know he was going to be speaking with me. That's a fabulous uh, memory and a fabulous accomplishment. I did a lot of organizational developments, encouraged and facilitated them, and I know I'm going to be lengthy, but I'm going to read them because they're ongoing today in ICA. Number one, in my presidential year, we established interest groups. There were no interest groups. That was established in my year. Number two, the bylaws and policies were not a committee. They were there for people to work on, but it was not established as a standing committee, which it is now. We had a new division. That division, which has been now there for 20 years, is the Illinois Association for Spiritual and Ethical Counseling. We established standing rules and effective governing council practices, so there were fair practices in how the meetings were run and that everybody had a voice. We conducted an evaluation. I don't know that one's been done since then, but I thought it was important to evaluate ourselves as leaders. So in March, I conducted an evaluation of each individual that was on the executive committee as well as on the governing council with favorable results. Let's see what else. We had an ICA networking directory. We actually published with the one of the committees, the Public Relations Committee under Christine Nolan, a ICA networking directory so people could find other people in a very quick way that were in the organization. I called for an increase in graduate student scholarships in the beginning to look at research scholarships, and that has developed within the ICA Foundation, but it also has developed as a result, I think, of the fact that I thought we needed to do this. The graduate students did not have the monies to go to finish programs and do whatever else they needed to do in the counseling field. And then I guess I'm looking at this, but I guess we didn't used to pay ICA with a credit card. So I initiated a task force to study credit card payments for ICA. And then probably the largest piece of that whole group of things is I had leadership support teams for leaders. And so people that were involved on the governing council had sub parts that were their support teams, and specifically the strategic planning committee had a support team of people that they could call so that they could do what they needed to do as a strategic planning committee. I established the ICA store. There's a very influential person that was IMHCA President 2 years. Her name is Miss V. Manger. Miss V was very, very prominent in the Mental Health Counseling Association in several ways. Number one, she thought it would be very cool if we had an ICA store where we sold products. And so I have hats, I have sweatshirts, I have shirts from her development of the ICA store. And that was also for public relations and marketing, because I thought we had a good marketing focus in 2003 and 2004. And part of that was due to that ICA store. I think also we brought the scope of leadership used to be a top-down approach, and we were listening to people's reports, specifically just the people at the top. And in this year, I brought the scope of leadership to a common dialogue in governing council and executive committee meetings, because at my governing council meetings, I would break people out into groups to dialogue.
Mhm.
And we specifically did this in March when we had critical issues to look at. And the only way to look at the critical issues was to hear what everybody else was seeing and hearing in their divisions and in their chapters. And I think that was the beginning of dialogue, because in my experience before that time, it was, here's what we're doing, here's what we're going to do, and here's what we'd like to do. I thought that was important. I had a transition conference before I started my year as president. My transition conference actually had credit hours. It had 6 credit hours. And I got that because I felt it was important that everybody attend. We had 61 people at the transition meeting before I was a before I was president. That was an unheard of number. They never had the number like that before. But the reason there were so many people is I actually had leadership training at that transition conference. And the people I brought in were all free. They were found from a speaker's bureau. And here are the things they talked about. And then 2 of the people were from the National Counseling Association. Here are the things they talked about. They were these: knowledge-based governance, who moved my cheese, that was all about change. You can make the horse drink water. And I wanted that. I wanted these because these were the issues I was seeing in the Counseling Association. You needed to drive your organization by knowledge-based governance. You needed to be able to deal with change. That was who moved my cheese. You were going to be working with people in situations where they weren't motivated. So I had someone talk about, you can make the horse drink water. And that was their skill level, was what they were talking about. I had marketing, because every part of the organization needs marketing. I spoke on collaborative leadership because nothing happens without all of us working together. And there are particular ways that collaborative leadership addresses that. I had somebody actually talking on positive attitude. I believe that was George O'Hare. And I had another person talking on understanding organizational behaviors, because I felt that sometimes I was sitting in a room and I didn't understand the whole components of an organization and how it works. So I had someone talking on that. And the last one was on motivation. But that was a huge, I felt that was a huge accomplishment as president. And I can stop there if you'd like.
No, I mean, it's 100% up to you. Like I said, I'm leaving you to fill the
Okay.
room with whatever you want to.
Okay. In that year as well, I keynoted at your division's conference with the IMHCA president at the time was Jim Blundo, and I was a keynote speaker as well. I think I was a luncheon speaker. And to put things into perspective, in that year, which was 2004, our ICA past president, Nadia, was a graduate student. And I remember that because we were sitting and talking together at a break during the conference. But that was a wonderful experience. Let me see if I'm missing anything else. Did a lot of grassroots work. There was a thing called Partners for Peace, and it was a state-funded program. And it was out of Chicago, and Tony Tallerud was very involved, and Dr. Tony Tallerud was very involved in that, and Pam Sanner, a counselor from Chicago Public Schools, and Maria McCabe, and that was a wonderful experience. Oh, I also, in my year as president, worked on the development of, it's called content review. The type 73 was being, and that was the degree for your school counseling degree. The exam questions were being remodeled and refined, and there were people in all of the exams that we take as professions. In our professions, there's a thing called a content review committee, and I was asked to serve on that content review committee to determine what the passing score would be for the questions that were developed by another group. But our job was to determine what was going to be the passing score for people to obtain their type 73 school counseling license. That was very interesting because you had counseling professors there, you had people in private practice. It was a huge conglomerate of people. What was interesting is the cutoff score, the professors wanted the cutoff scores to be much higher than what they really needed to be. And what ended up as a balance is that there was an understanding from that content review committee that when people finished their degrees, they were at a level of being able to do their jobs. They didn't need to be at a level of 100% of knowing everything about everything. They just needed to be functional, knowing that they were going to be doing continued training and continued requirements. But that was an interesting, I think, accomplishment to even be sitting on there. And I'm really big on support, and I did it a lot in my year as president. That's never something that has stopped for me. That's something I just continue to do because it's just inherent. And I think that's enough for accomplishments.
All right, definitely. Well, you say that's enough for accomplishments, but
Okay.
a lot of people know, or who knows, might not know, that you served in a lot of other leadership roles as well. So what other leadership roles have you served in ACA, the Midwest region, and ICA?
Okay, I'll start with ICA. I started as a session moderator. I was walking around at the conference, and Patricia Merriweather was president in 1998. And she tapped me on the shoulder, and she said, "You're going to be a moderator for a session." I had no idea what a moderator for a session was. Do they have moderators now for sessions? They do, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so she tapped me. She says, "I want you to do this, and this is what you're going to do, and you're going to be just fine." That was the first role in ICA, really. And that was before 1990. When I said 1998, that was before 1998. I was just attending the conference.
Right.
Once I became involved in the organization, and that was 1995 as Human Rights Chair. 96, I was taking pictures. I was taking pictures in 95, and the president in 1996 was Dr. Stuart Hayes. It's now Dr. Stuart Chen Hayes. He said, "Would you like to be the photographer?" And I said, "Well, what would that entail?" He says, "Well, Kris, you're taking pictures throughout the organization and you're submitting them to ICA. Why don't you just be the photographer?" So I was a photographer. I also was a governor. Now they're called regional representatives, I think, but they were used to be called governors. Served on conference committees, served on strategic planning, task forces. They were looking at revamping. I was appointed to the task force to revamp the structure of ICA. So also a task force on the visioning. I headed up the visioning task force, the visioning task force of ICA, which now exists for, I think, for the past 11 years. I was a SECO rep. I was on legislative committees. I'm still just with ICA. I was ISCA school counseling president, 2007, 2008. I was vice president of the Illinois Association for Specialists in Group Work. Anna Marie Yates was in that group at the time, and it was a struggling group. And so she asked me to be on there, and I did. And I presented at ICA transition meetings. And what else? I think that's ICA. If I move on to Midwest, in Midwest, I was a presenter, and I also was an awards chair and was a 2-time nominee for Midwest Region Chair. However, that was at the time that I was president-elect and I was ICA president. And so in my nomination, I was supposed to stand up there and talk about why I should be nominated. So the first time I was nominated, and this is what I said: "I'm currently serving," actually, I'm sorry, I think I was ICA president when I was nominated. "I'm currently serving as ICA president, and as much as I would like to be nominated for this position, I think I'm going to have to step down from being nominated because I think my true focus needs to be on the state organization and what my goals are for this organization in this year, maybe at a later date." And then I was nominated again the following year. So and that was my involvement with the Midwest. In ACA, I was a Human Rights Committee member. I was an ACA key contact, and that was for legislation. I don't know that they have them anymore, but I did a lot of legislative visits with ACA, but I also there were, I think, 3 of us, ACA key contacts. I was also a chair of a committee that no longer exists. It's called the Interprofessional Committee, and that was my involvement in ACA.
All right. Like I said, a lot of leadership roles.
Yeah.
So I think the running theme here is you've been very busy.
I've been pretty busy, yeah.
So then circling back to something you mentioned earlier about, changing policies and things like that. And you mentioned how it's very important to do things like that. So let's focus a little bit on that by me asking, what is the importance of policies and legislative involvement?
I'm going to probably put this into one sentence. I know you're not going to believe this, but I think I can get this into one sentence.
Okay.
Policies and legislation both work to create positive, necessary changes to address implicit bias and inequity at the local, state, and national bodies across the United States. And I gave you examples of Governor State University, 1994.
Mm-hmm.
The other private university was in 1995. And I also worked with the importance of policies and legislative. In my work with the legislator in the school district that I worked in for 13 years, we ended up seeing a change in policy of funding monies that were coming in to schools of low income. The school council ratio changed dramatically in the particular school district I was in. In fact, the year I left, and I retired in 2011, in 2011 to 2012, they hired additional counselors in all the schools. That was because of the legislative work and the relationship I had built with the legislator in the school district that I worked in. The importance of policies and legislative involvement cannot be emphasized enough.
I 100% agree there, right? That's why everybody should get involved early and get involved often. You'll never know what will happen.
You never know. You just don't know. And also, of course, when things happen, they don't necessarily happen when you're there in the place and at the time you'd like them to happen. Down the road, they happen. And that's kind of what I saw is down the road, I've seen things happen and develop, and that's important to know.
Yeah, definitely. 100% agree. All right. So, you've been working in schools, you've been very involved in ICA, ACA, Midwestern region, and all that fun stuff. And I'm pretty sure all that is very stressful. So hopefully, like you mentioned, you were also a professional pianist. Hopefully that brought you a little bit of stress relief, right? So how did you become a professional pianist and what did you do in that profession?
Okay, well, this is a remarkable question. Piano has been my lifelong inspiration and balance. I started playing at the age of 5. My uncle came over with a piano. It wasn't called a piano. It was the first type of a keyboard. And because he noticed I was playing piano in all the different places that I was at, where he was at.
Mm-hmm.
And so one day he came over, and I have a picture of this. Came over with this little keyboard, and he said, "This is yours." I'm 5. And he put it in my bedroom, and he said, "Here, and it comes with music. And see, you just read here, and this is what you do." So I started playing when I was 5. Somewhere the time that I was about 7, and this is leading me into professional pianist, by the time I was 7, I said to my mother, "I want a piano." And she said, "When you're 10, I said, "I'm playing now. And I really like one now." So I didn't have a piano until I was 10. I played until I got a piano, and that was I played on this it was called a Magnus organ. So then how this further developed into professional pianist is I thought I was going to major in piano at Northern Illinois University, and I ended up not doing that, but I ended up teaching piano for 20 some years. 1999, I really started a piano business, and I played professionally. I actually played for your opening receptions for ICA, and I played in 99, and I played in 2000, and I played in 2006. One of the most fun things, most memorable things I've done, I think it was in 2002. I was at I think it was the Palmer House in Chicago. It was the third generation Holocaust survivors conference in Chicago. And it was an international conference. And the person that was a speaker for my conference in 2003, Dr. Judith Tellerman, was going to be debuting a song that I worked with her on called Legacy. And I was going to be playing that song for the first time with her on the piano. I also recorded 4 piano CDs somewhere between 2010 and 2013. And I played private parties. And that's how I became a professional pianist, is because I had an uncle that came in and saw a need, and the need was the piano, and that just kept driving me to what I guess I did.
Oh, I did not know you recorded CDs.
I recorded CDs, and
like
if this recording allows me to, I can actually pull up one for you if you'd like.
Oh yeah, go for it.
The last CD that I did were all original songs, and they were based on all of my life experiences. Keeping it simple, going above and beyond, it's called Beyond, Waiting for Love, Waterfall, those are the things that happen in your life and they just keep coming and coming and coming. Thunder Island, those are all your challenges in life. And Steady Courage, how you get through things. And here's my song, Steady Courage.
Wow, that was really good. You were not lying about being a professional.
Thank you.
Mhm. I really liked how it sounded like you had a main beat that
Uh-huh.
carried all the way through. And then there sounded like there were some highs, but there were some lows, but
Yeah,
then it still just went back to that main beat that carried it through. So was
that's
that the intention or was it something else?
no, the intention was the steadiness with a little feel of high and low, which is what happens when you're in that mode of courage, but it always went back to steady.
All right. Very nice. Very nice. When did you write that song?
That was Beyond Expectations was written in 2000, December 13th. It was recorded December 13th of 2011.
Mhm.
It was
Oh, wow.
13 years ago.
Well, you heard it here, folks. If you guys need someone to play at any events that you have, call Kris Wheatley because she is really good. All right, so as we all know, all good things must come to an end because now we're down to our final three questions. So you shared a lot with us already, but I'm hoping to impart a little bit more knowledge if you have anything else you want to share. So is there anything you would like to tell people starting out in the field or have been in the field for a while?
I would.
Go for it.
I would. Whether you're starting out, whether you're in your program, you've just finished your program, you're in doctoral studies, you're in practice, no matter what the setting would be, what I would say is continue to be open minded, continue to self evaluate, get supervision, balance, balance, balance. Get a wide variety of counseling training and experiences, especially those that you are deficit and weak in, especially focus on those. Expose yourself to a wide variety of counselors because those counselors come from different experiences with different expertises in and out of your field and your profession. And probably one of the most important things I think is to stay active and knowledgeable of your counseling profession at the state level as well as the national level. Connecting with your legislative offices, very important. Things happen when you do that. Work with them. And that would be what I would say to anyone in the beginning, in their beginning stages of the field, as well as in the later stages of their field.
All right, perfect. Thank you. All right, so before we get to the most important question, gotta get to the second most important question. All right, so is there anything that you would like to say that I haven't had a chance to ask you?
I would.
Hmm.
And that's not a surprise. I already told you about the policy changes at Governor State University, and also in Kane County, in the district that I worked in, and also with legislative work. What I didn't share with you is in 1996, I was supposed to go to a national counseling conference. I believe it was in Pennsylvania. But at that time, I also had the opportunity to be a spokesperson for the Epilepsy Foundation of Greater Chicago. And they were going to Washington, D.C. with to meet with the National Institutes of Health. And the purpose of the meeting with the National Institutes of Health was to press the importance of funding for people with head injuries. I had worked with people with head injuries in 1986 and 1987, 1988, 1999, and I was a volunteer at the Epilepsy Foundation of Greater Chicago. And because I'd worked with them so much, that was an opportunity that they afforded me to do. They said I was a pretty good spokesperson, because I said, well, why don't you pick another person to do this? I said, no, I think you would represent us. And so I did that. And we did get the increased funding for head injuries at that institute in Washington, D.C. in 1996. The last thing I'm going to say is I had the opportunity to work on the DSM-5. I applied to do that. And so in 2012, that was 11 years ago, in 2011 and 2012, I believe it was, I worked on the DSM-5 field trial studies. And I have to tell you, that was a fabulous experience, because you were working with Vanderbilt and Johns Hopkins, and any questions you had through your field trial studies, you were talking directly with the people that, when you look at the back of that particular book, DSM-5, they're there, and they were just all wonderful people to work with. And the last thing I'm going to say is I continue to research, I continue to read, and I continue to provide any type of support in leadership that I can in this association. And also,
Perfect. Perfect and perfect. All right, so now the most important question, right? Drum roll a little bit, but
roll.
right? But where can people find or contact you for more information if they have any questions?
Okay, so they can find me at Kris, KRISLCPC at AOL.com. They can also find me through contacting the ICA office. They can also find me through my piano website. That's Kris Sandra Wheatley. I'll spell that. KRISSANDRA Wheatley, WHEATLEY at Weebly, WEEBLY.com. And my phone number is 630-754-7670.
Oh, perfect. Well, you heard it here, folks. If you're looking to play the piano, got any questions about legislation, how to get involved, leadership, anything like that, contact Kris Wheatley. All righty. Other than that, then, that's about it. Again, thank you, Kris, for coming and talking with me today. I really do appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure to do this interview for the Illinois Mental Health Counselors Association today. Thank you, Coresair.
Yep, no problem. All right, everybody, that's going to be it. This is Coresair Mack, president of the Illinois Mental Health Counselors Association, signing off, and I'll see you guys in the next interview. Take care.